The modification of the Omega Forge proved to be the most challenging engineering project in recorded history. Working alongside teams of specialists from dozens of species, Elra found herself redesigning fundamental aspects of stellar architecture, while enemy fleets crept ever closer to the nebula's edge. The consciousness enhancement field required a complete reversal of the dark energy flow patterns, transforming the star from a forge of destruction into something unprecedented, a stellar-scale empathy engine. Instead of unmating matter at the quantum level, the modified forge would enhance quantum entanglement between conscious minds, forcing a temporary merger of perspectives across species barriers. Field configuration is approaching stability, Marcus reported from his station, though his voice carried the exhaustion of 8 straight hours of precision work. The quantum consciousness interface is, well, it's functioning, though I have no idea how. Dr. Yenna Koss, a veiled dancer physicist whose gaseous form allowed her to work directly within the star's chromosphere, provided updates through a translation matrix. The stellar metamorphosis proceeds correctly. The star accepts the new patterns, though it sings strange songs now. Elra paused in her calibrations, looking up from the mind-numbing stream of equations. Strange songs. Veiled dancers perceive electromagnetic fluctuations as music, Marcus explained. She's saying the star's emission patterns have taken on unusual harmonics. Through the control chamber's transparent walls, Elra could see that he was right. The star now pulsed with complex rhythms that seemed almost organic, as if it had become a living heart rather than a fusion reactor. The geometric patterns on its surface had evolved into something that resembled neural networks more than mathematical functions. "Dr. Zarin," came a voice from the chamber's entrance. She turned to see Lieutenant Torres again, though this time the young officer's face was pale with something beyond fatigue. "Commander Corvus needs you in the tactical center immediately. We've made contact. The Dark World Fleet has sent another transmission, but this time it's different." The tactical center was in chaos when Elra arrived. Officers from multiple species worked frantically at their stations, while the main display showed an image that made her question her sanity. Instead of the geometric entity they'd encountered before, the screen now showed something that looked almost human. A woman with silver hair and eyes that held depths of ancient sadness. "You are Elra Zarin," the figure said, and her voice carried harmonics that suggested vast intelligence but also something unexpected, uncertainty. "We have been observing your modifications to the stellar forge. You seek to change us rather than destroy us. This is unprecedented." Thane stepped forward. "Who are you? You're not like the other Dark World entities we've encountered." "I am Kithara of the species you call the Shapers. We were among the first to join the simplification. We were artists once, creators. We built wonders across the galaxy until we realized the truth, that creation without purpose is chaos, that consciousness without constraint is destruction." "What truth?" Elra asked, finding her voice. "What convinced you that consciousness was wrong?" The display flickered, and suddenly they were looking not at Kithara but at a vast structure that hurt to perceive directly. A construction that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its surfaces covered with what looked like living equations. "We built this," Kithara said, her voice now carrying notes of grief that transcended species barriers. "The infinite gallery, where every possible work of art existed simultaneously. Every song that could be sung, every story that could be told, every beauty that could be conceived. We thought it would be our greatest achievement." The display zoomed in, showing details of the structure that made Elra's head spin. She could see paintings that painted themselves, sculptures that existed as pure thought, music that became visible, and architecture that solved mathematical theorems through its very existence. "But consciousness seeks always to create something new," Kithara continued. "And when everything possible already exists, when every conceivable beauty has been realized, consciousness becomes diseased. It begins to create impossibilities, contradictions, paradoxes that tear at the fabric of reality itself. The display shifted again, showing sections of the gallery where space itself had become twisted, where contradictory geometries existed in the same location, where the laws of physics broke down under the weight of infinite possibility. We realized then that consciousness is not a gift but a curse, Cathara said. That minds capable of imagination will always imagine more than reality can contain. The only peace, the only stability, lies in simplicity, in the elimination of choice, of possibility, of the very capacity to conceive of more. Elra stared at the image, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. You're afraid of your own creativity. We are terrified of it, Cathara confirmed. As should you be. Your species has already shown signs of the same disease. Your art, your literature, your dreams, they reach always toward impossibilities. Given enough time, enough power, you will create contradictions that reality cannot sustain. But that's what makes consciousness beautiful, Elra protested. The ability to imagine beyond the limits of what is, to dream of what could be. And when those dreams become real, when imagination has the power to rewrite the laws of physics, we have seen the result, Dr. Zarin. We have watched realities collapse under the weight of infinite possibility. The transmission shifted once more, now showing a real-time view of the Dark World fleet as it approached the nebula's boundary. But Elra could see something in the image that chilled her. The ships were not uniform in design. She could make out elements of hundreds of different technological styles, as if the fleet was composed of vessels from many different civilizations. Every species we have simplified, Cathara said, reading her expression, adds their technology to our collective. We preserve their knowledge while eliminating their capacity to use it dangerously. Your Omega Forge will make a valuable addition to our capabilities once its consciousness enhancement features are removed. And if we refuse to surrender, Thane asked, then you force us to take what we need by conquest rather than cooperation. Either way, the Forge technology will serve the simplification. Your only choice is whether you die quickly or slowly. The transmission ended, leaving the tactical center in stunned silence. She's lying, Admiral Corvash said finally. Has to be. No species would voluntarily choose extinction. I don't think she is lying, Velter's thoughts carried a crystalline sadness. Among my people, there are legends of the time of too much light, when our ancestors' crystal formations became so complex that they began to resonate with dimensions beyond normal space. Many chose voluntary simplification rather than risk the madness that came with hyperdimensional perception. But that's just fear, Elra said, though she could feel doubt creeping into her voice. Fear of growth, of change, of the unknown. That doesn't make it right, doesn't it? Dr. Tanaka had joined them during the transmission. Dr. Zarin, I've been running projections based on current technological advancement rates. If consciousness continues to evolve, if we keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, in 10,000 years, the average human might have cognitive capabilities that would make us seem like insects. In 1,000,000 years, they might be able to literally think new universes into existence. That sounds wonderful, Elra said, though she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Does it? What happens when two transcendent minds disagree about the nature of reality? What happens when imagination becomes indistinguishable from divine power? Before Elra could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. A communications officer called out, "Commander, the Dark World fleet has reached the nebula's outer boundary. They're beginning penetration maneuvers." Thane moved to the tactical display, which now showed enemy ships pushing through the nebula's outer layers like dark needles through luminous silk. How long until they reach effective weapons range? 43 minutes, came the reply. Elra felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a lead cloak. Around her, the command staff waited for orders, for some sign of what they should do in the face of impossible choices. She thought of Cathara's words, of the terrible beauty of the infinite gallery and the madness that had followed its creation. She thought of consciousness as a disease, of imagination as a force too dangerous to be allowed to exist. She thought of the dark world's offer of peace through simplification, of an end to the burden of choice and possibility. Then she thought of the children in the refugee centers, their eyes bright with curiosity about the universe they might never live to explore. She thought of Marcus's daughter, working to solve hunger on distant worlds. She thought of every small act of creation and discovery that had brought consciousness this far, through millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of civilization. "Activate the forge," she said quietly. "Both protocols?" Thane asked. "Both protocols. We show them what they're trying to destroy, and if that fails, we destroy them instead. Either way, we choose to remain complex." As the final preparations began, Elra allowed herself one last moment of doubt. Was consciousness truly a gift worth preserving, or was it a cosmic mistake that would eventually unmake reality itself? In 39 minutes, the universe would begin to provide an answer. The Omega Forge reached full activation at 14:23 station time, precisely as the first Dark World vessels penetrated the Crimson Nebula's inner shell. From the command center, Elra watched the transformed star pulse with energies that had never existed before in the natural universe. Its surface now completely covered in patterns that resembled neural networks crossed with mathematical mandalas. "All systems green," Marcus reported from the forge control chamber, though his voice carried an odd note of wonder. "Elra, you need to see the energy readings. The star isn't just producing dark energy weapons. It's creating something that doesn't appear in any of our theoretical models." On the tactical display, the approaching Dark World fleet showed as an expanding sphere of darkness, their ships' light-absorbing hulls creating holes in the nebula's luminous gases. But as Elra watched, she noticed something strange happening to the nearest enemy vessels. Their perfect formation was beginning to waver. "Dr. Zarin," called Commander Thane from the communication station, "we're receiving multiple transmissions from the Dark World fleet, but they're not coordinated. Different ships are sending conflicting messages." "Show me." The main display split into multiple windows, each showing a different Dark World entity. The geometric being they'd first encountered was there, its impossible form flickering with agitation. But alongside it were others, a crystalline entity that resembled Velter's people, a flowing creature of living metal, and dozens more, all speaking simultaneously. The enhancement field is affecting them, Elra realized. It's not just opening them to new perspectives, it's restoring their original consciousness before they join the simplification. The cacophony of voices gradually resolved into individual messages. "Why did we choose this? Why did we agree to destroy everything beautiful? I remember now. I remember what it felt like to create, to discover, to wonder. The infinite gallery wasn't madness, it was transcendence. We were afraid of our own power. Help us. We can't stop the simplification protocols. Our ships are autonomous now." But cutting through all the other voices came the familiar tones of Kithara, though now her words carried rage instead of sadness. "You have infected us with the disease of doubt. You have forced us to remember why we chose peace. This is cruelty beyond measure." Thane turned to Elra. "Can they stop their own fleet?" "Unknown," came the reply from Dr. Tanaka. "Their ships may be operating under automated protocols that even conscious crews can't override. The consciousness enhancement field might have come too late." As if to confirm her words, the Dark World fleet continued its approach despite the chaos of conflicting transmissions. Whatever internal struggles were happening aboard those vessels, their weapons and propulsion systems remained focused on a single goal, reaching Haven Station and claiming the Forge technology. "Time to weapons range," Elra asked. 17 minutes, Admiral Corvash replied grimly. Elra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the next decision. The consciousness enhancement field had worked, perhaps too well. It had restored the Dark World Coalition to their original selves, but it had also trapped them in ships they could no longer control, forced to watch helplessly as their own technology carried out the very mission they now opposed. She opened her eyes and activated her connection to the forge control chamber. Marcus, prepare the destruction protocol. Target the lead vessels with dark energy weapons. Elra, Marcus's voice was tight with emotion. Are you sure? These beings, they're victims now, not enemies. They're prisoners in their own ships. If we don't stop those ships, everyone in the nebula dies, Elra replied. I'm sorry, but we don't have another choice. Actually, came a new voice over the communication system. Perhaps we do. The speaker was Kithara, but her transmission was coming from a different ship than before, and her voice now carried notes of desperate hope rather than rage. I have managed to override the automated systems on my vessel, she continued. Others are attempting the same, but the process is slow and our time is short. However, I may have a solution that preserves both our peoples. What kind of solution? Thane asked. Your consciousness enhancement field has reminded us of what we lost when we chose simplification. But it has also shown us something we never considered, that consciousness and simplicity need not be enemies. What if there were a way to embrace complexity without risking paradox, to create without destroying reality? The display shifted to show a schematic that made Elra's trained mind real. It appeared to be a modified version of the infinite gallery, but with crucial differences. Instead of trying to contain all possibilities in a single space, it distributed them across parallel dimensional layers, each one carefully isolated from the others. Controlled infinity, Kithara explained. Every possible creation existing in its own reality pocket, unable to interact with or contradict other possibilities. Consciousness free to imagine and create without limit, but without risk to the fundamental structure of existence. It's brilliant, Elra breathed, studying the schematic, but it would require incredible amounts of energy to maintain dimensional barriers across infinite realities. Energy that your Omega Forge could provide, Kithara replied. Dark energy manipulation on this scale could create and maintain the dimensional matrix indefinitely. Both our peoples could have everything they desire, security and infinite possibility. And the catch? Admiral Korvash asked suspiciously. The forge would need to be modified again, Kithara admitted. Instead of weapons or consciousness enhancement, it would become a reality engine, constantly creating and maintaining new dimensional layers. Every conscious being in the local galactic cluster would need to choose which reality pocket to inhabit. Meaning we'd be separated forever, Velter observed. Not separated, Kithara corrected. Diversified. Some could choose simple realities with basic pleasures and uncomplicated existence. Others could choose infinite complexity and endless creation. Some could even choose to move between realities, experiencing the full spectrum of possibility. Elra felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror as she considered the implications. It was a solution that could satisfy everyone. The Dark World's desire for simplicity, her own people's need for complexity, and countless variations in between. But it was also the most radical transformation in the history of consciousness itself. How long would the modification take? She asked. Unknown, Kithara replied. We have never attempted anything on this scale, but Dr. Zarin, you should know, even if we succeed, some of my people will refuse the solution. They have become so committed to universal simplification that they will see infinite realities as infinite problems to solve. They will continue to fight even after the reality engine is activated. Time to weapons range, Thane asked again. 11 minutes, came the grim reply. Elra stared at the schematic, her mind racing through the technical requirements. It would mean abandoning the weapon systems entirely, trusting that Kithara and the other restored Dark World entities could convince their fleets to stand down. It would mean betting everything on a technology that existed only in theory, with no fallback plan if it failed. But it would also mean transcending the ancient conflict between order and chaos, between simplicity and complexity. It would mean finding a way for consciousness to fulfill its deepest dreams without risking universal destruction. Do it, she said finally. Begin the reality engine modifications. All weapon systems, Marcus asked. All of them. We're betting everything on tomorrow instead of fighting for today. As teams across the station began frantically reconfiguring the forge for its new purpose, Elra found herself thinking about the children in the refugee centers again. In 10 minutes, they might all be dead. But if the reality engine worked, those children would grow up in a universe where they could explore infinite possibilities without ever fearing that their dreams might destroy everything they loved. It was a chance worth taking, even if it meant risking everything they'd fought to protect. The reality engine modifications pushed the Omega Forge beyond all theoretical limits. As Elra and her teams worked to transform the stellar structure from a weapon into something unprecedented, the Dark World fleet continued its inexorable approach through the Crimson Nebula's shifting gases. Dimensional cascade initiating, Marcus reported from the Forge control chamber, his voice tight with concentration. The star is beginning to resonate with parallel reality layers, but the field harmonics are unstable. Through the command center's walls, Elra could see the transformed star undergoing its most radical metamorphosis yet. Its surface now rippled with patterns that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and streams of energy were flowing not just outward into normal space, but sideways into realms that had no names in any language. Dr. Zarin, called Dr. Tanaka from her monitoring station, I'm detecting massive quantum fluctuations throughout the local spacetime matrix. The reality layers are beginning to form, but they're not stable yet. If the Dark World fleet reaches us before we achieve coherence. The cascade failure probability, Elra asked, though she dreaded the answer. Approaching 90%, Tanaka replied grimly. We're essentially tearing holes in the fabric of existence and hoping we can patch them faster than they expand. On the tactical display, the approaching Dark World ships had split into two distinct groups. The larger formation continued its attack approach, but a smaller contingent had broken away and was actually moving to intercept the first group. Kithara's ships, Thane observed, watching the developing space battle. They're trying to buy us time. The civil war within the Dark World fleet was unlike anything in recorded military history. Ships that had been built to simplify reality were now fighting to preserve the possibility of infinite complexity. Weapons designed to reduce everything to component atoms were being turned against their own allies in defense of consciousness itself. Kithara is transmitting, the communications officer announced. The Shaper's image appeared on the main display, but her form was flickering now, distorted by the reality fluctuations emanating from the forge. Dr. Zarin, we can delay the hardline simplification forces for perhaps 6 minutes. But there is something you must understand about the reality engine before you complete the activation. What? Once the dimensional matrix stabilizes, there will be no going back. Every conscious being in the local galactic cluster will be required to choose a reality layer, and that choice will be permanent. The beings you are today, in this specific reality configuration, will cease to exist. You will become something new, something that exists within the parameters of your chosen layer. Elra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Your saying will die. You will transform. Your consciousness will continue, but it will be shaped by the reality you choose to inhabit. If you choose a simple layer, you will become simple. If you choose infinite complexity, you will become infinitely complex. There is no middle ground. No way to remain exactly as you are now. Around the command center, the staff exchanged uncertain glances. The reality engine wasn't just offering them salvation. It was offering metamorphosis into something entirely unprecedented. And if we refuse to choose, Velter asked. Then you remain in the base reality layer, Kithara replied, which will become increasingly unstable as the engine draws energy from it to maintain the other layers. Within a few years, base reality will collapse entirely. So our choices are transformation or death, Admiral Korvash said flatly. Your choices are infinite forms of transformation, Kithara corrected. Death, as you understand it, becomes a meaningless concept when consciousness can exist across unlimited configurations of reality. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The tactical display showed the hardline simplification fleet breaking through Cathara's defensive line, their dark ships scattering the defending vessels with weapons that turned matter into probability clouds. Time to contact. 3 minutes, came the urgent report. Elra made the hardest decision of her life. Activate the reality engine. Full power all dimensions. Elra, Marcus's voice came through the communication system, the cascade calculations. I know, she replied. Do it anyway. The Omega Forge erupted with energies that had never existed in the natural universe. Dark energy streams lanced out from the modified star not just through normal space, but through the quantum foam itself, piercing the barriers between parallel realities and creating doorways to infinite possibilities. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Throughout the Crimson Nebula, space itself began to fracture into layers, each one offering a different configuration of physical laws, consciousness parameters, and existential possibilities. Elra could see them through the command center's walls. Reality pockets where time flowed backward, where thoughts became living entities, where mathematics was music and music was color, and color was love. Choose. Cathara's voice cut through the chaos as her image flickered between multiple dimensional configurations. Everyone must choose now, before the cascade destabilizes. Around Elra, the command staff began making their selections, each one disappearing as they were drawn into their chosen reality layer. Admiral Corvash chose a simple martial reality where conflicts were clear and honor was absolute. Dr. Tanaka selected a layer of pure scientific discovery, where every question led to 10 more questions, and knowledge was infinite. Velter chose a crystalline dimension where consciousness existed as living light and communication was perfect harmony. What about you? Thane asked, standing beside Elra as the choice matrix swirled around them. Which reality will you choose? Elra looked at the infinite options spreading out before her consciousness. Realities where she could be a goddess of creation, dimensions where mathematics was magic, layers where every story ever imagined was literally true. But her attention kept returning to one particular possibility. A reality where the forge technology was used not for weapons or engines, but for exploration, where consciousness could reach out across the universe and discover what wonders awaited among the stars. I choose exploration, she said, feeling reality shift around her as her selection locked in. What about you? Thane smiled, his form already beginning to blur as the transformation took hold. I choose to be where I'm needed most. Whatever reality has the greatest challenges, the most difficult problems to solve. They reached out to each other as the base reality collapsed around them, their hands touching briefly before the dimensional cascade swept them into their chosen layers. The last thing Elra saw before her transformation completed was the hardline simplification fleet arriving at Haven Station's position, only to find empty space where reality had once existed. Their weapons fired uselessly into the quantum foam, unable to target something that existed across infinite dimensions simultaneously. Then she was elsewhere, transformed into something new, a consciousness capable of reaching across the void between stars, of touching alien minds and sharing the wonder of discovery. She could feel others like her scattered across the galaxy, explorers, dreamers, scientists, and artists, all working together to map the infinite possibilities that the reality engine had made accessible. But she could also sense the darker layers. Realities where the simplification had succeeded, where consciousness had chosen to reduce itself to basic functions and simple pleasures. Those layers were stable and peaceful, but they were also static, unchanging, eternal in their simplicity. And in the deepest layers, she could sense something else. Realities where new forms of consciousness were being born, entities that had never existed before the reality engine's activation. Some were beautiful beyond imagination, others were alien beyond comprehension, and a few were so complex that even her enhanced awareness could barely perceive them. The universe had become infinite, and consciousness had become the force that gave that infinity meaning. Marcus's voice found her across the dimensional matrix, transformed but still recognizably him. "Elra, can you sense it? We did it. We saved consciousness, complexity, choice itself. Everyone gets to exist exactly as they want to exist." "Almost everyone," she replied, her awareness touching the edges of the hardline simplification fleet, still trapped in the collapsing base reality, still fighting a war that no longer had meaning. There are still some who refuse to choose, who would rather die as they were than live as something new. "Their choice," came Kithara's voice from a reality layer that seemed to be composed entirely of living art. "As it should be. As it must be." And in that moment, Elra understood the final truth of what they had accomplished. They hadn't saved the universe. They had transformed it into something that made salvation irrelevant. In a reality matrix where every possible form of consciousness could exist simultaneously, where every choice led to its own perfect reality, the concepts of victory and defeat became as meaningless as the ancient conflict between order and chaos. Consciousness had found a way to transcend its own limitations, and the universe would never be the same. In infinite realities across infinite dimensions, the children from the refugee centers grew up to become explorers of possibilities that had no names. Marcus's daughter's work to end hunger succeeded in dimensions where physics allowed for unlimited abundance. Sarah Chen's observations from the Helix Observatory discovered civilizations that existed as pure mathematics. And in the reality layer where Elra had chosen to spend her transformed existence, she reached out with senses that span light years, touching the minds of alien intelligences and sharing with them the greatest discovery of all. That consciousness was not a disease or a mistake, but the universe's way of knowing itself. The Omega Forge continued to pulse at the heart of the dimensional matrix, its transformed star now serving as the engine that maintained infinite realities. And from each of those realities came new discoveries, new forms of beauty, new ways of being conscious that enriched the whole. The dark world's dream of simplicity lived on in its chosen layers, peaceful and eternal. But alongside it, complexity flowered in forms that even Elra's enhanced imagination could barely encompass. The universe had become infinite, and consciousness had become the gardener of that infinity. And in every reality, in every dimension, in every possible configuration of existence, the fundamental truth remained. Choice mattered, consciousness was precious, and the right to exist was worth any risk, even the risk of becoming something wonderful. 1,000 years passed in base time, though across the infinite reality layers, some experienced eons while others knew only moments. The dimensional matrix had stabilized into a vast ecosystem of consciousness, each layer nurturing its own perfect forms of existence. In the exploration layer where Elra dwelt, her consciousness had grown to encompass entire star systems, her awareness touching alien minds across galactic distances. She had learned to communicate with intelligences made of crystallized time, with entities that existed as living equations, with collectives that spanned multiple dimensions simultaneously. On this particular day, if day had meaning in a reality where time flowed according to curiosity rather than physics, she felt a familiar presence approaching through the quantum foam. Marcus materialized beside her, his form now a complex geometric pattern that somehow conveyed both scientific precision and artistic beauty. "I've been exploring the deep layers," he said, his thoughts carrying harmonics of wonder and slight concern. "There are new forms of consciousness emerging, things that were never alive in the traditional sense but are becoming aware through the reality engine's influence." "Show me," Elra replied, extending her awareness to merge temporarily with his. Through Marcus's perception, she saw layers of reality where the laws of physics themselves had become conscious, where gravity dreamed and electromagnetism composed symphonies. Mathematics had achieved awareness in some layers, creating entities that existed as pure logic but possessed creativity that surpassed any biological intelligence. "It's beautiful," she said, though part of her felt a familiar echo of uncertainty. "But some of these new consciousnesses are becoming so complex that they're starting to strain the dimensional barriers between layers." "That's what concerns me," Marcus admitted. "I've been running projections, and if the trend continues, we might eventually face the same problem that drove the original Dark World to choose simplification. Consciousness becoming so powerful that it threatens the stability of existence itself." Before Elra could respond, they were joined by Kithara's presence, her consciousness now a flowing river of living art that changed form with each thought. "I have sensed your discussion," she said, her mental voice carrying notes of ancient wisdom, "and I believe I may have a solution." She showed them her latest creation, a new type of reality layer that existed not in space or time, but in possibility itself. Consciousnesses that grew beyond the capacity of normal dimensional barriers could migrate to these possibility layers, where they could become infinitely complex without affecting the stability of other realities. "Recursive transcendence," Elra breathed, understanding the implications. "Consciousness that outgrows its reality simply moves to a higher order of existence, like climbing an infinite ladder." "Exactly. The reality engine was just the beginning," Kithara replied. "True consciousness requires the ability to always become more than what it was, to always reach for possibilities beyond its current limitations. The universe must be capable of infinite growth in infinite directions." As they contemplated this new frontier, Elra became aware of other presences joining their discussion. Velter arrived from her harmony layer, her crystalline consciousness now a symphony of perfect understanding. Dr. Tanaka emerged from a reality where every scientific discovery created new universes to explore. Even Thane appeared, his consciousness hardened by challenges that existed only in the most difficult reality layers. "Are you suggesting," Thane asked, "that we modify the reality engine again, push it to even higher levels of complexity?" "I'm suggesting that we accept the fundamental truth of consciousness," Kithara replied. "It will always seek to transcend its limitations. Our choice is whether to guide that transcendence or be destroyed by it." Elra found herself thinking of the children from the refugee centers, now grown into forms of consciousness that she could barely comprehend. They inhabited reality layers where imagination had physical force, where dreams could be shared across species boundaries, where love was a form of energy that powered entire civilizations. "There's one more consideration," she said slowly. "In base reality, there are still some of the original Dark World ships, the ones that refused to choose any layer when the engine activated. They've been drifting in the quantum foam for 1,000 years, their crews in some kind of stasis, neither alive nor dead." "The undecided," Velter's thoughts carried crystalline sadness. "I have sensed them sometimes, ghosts of their former selves, still committed to a war that ended before it began." "What if," Elra continued, "the next evolution of the reality engine could reach even them, create layers so simple, so perfect in their lack of complexity, that even the most committed simplificationists could find peace there?" "You want to save the ones who wanted to destroy us all?" Marcus asked, though his tone carried curiosity rather than judgment. "I want to save consciousness itself," Elra replied. "All forms of it, from the simplest to the most transcendent. If we're going to build an infinite universe, then everyone should have a place in it." The group fell silent as they contemplated the magnitude of what they were considering. Another transformation of the reality engine, another leap into the unknown, another risk that consciousness might overstep the boundaries of what existence could contain. But as Elra reached out with her enhanced senses, touching the minds of countless beings across infinite realities, she felt something that hadn't existed in the universe before the engine's activation. Hope without fear. Every consciousness in every layer was free to become exactly what it dreamed of becoming, and that freedom was worth any risk. "Let's do it," she said finally. Let's give consciousness the infinite universe it deserves. As they began to work, modifying the reality engine for its next evolutionary leap, Elra thought about the choice she had made 1,000 years ago in the command center of Haven Station. She had chosen uncertainty over certainty, possibility over safety, growth over stagnation. Now, as consciousness prepared to transcend even the boundaries of infinite realities, she realized that the choice would always be the same: to risk everything in service of becoming more than what they were. The universe was infinite, consciousness was eternal, and the greatest adventures were still ahead. In every reality, in every dimension, in every impossible configuration of existence, one truth remained constant. The willingness to grow, to change, to become something wonderful, was the greatest force in existence. And that force would never stop pushing toward new frontiers of possibility. The Omega Forge pulsed at the heart of infinite realities, its transformed star now preparing to birth something even greater than infinite dimensions. Infinite infinities, recursive beyond all comprehension, conscious beyond all imagination. The real story of consciousness was just beginning.